Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here. Yesterday, the Peoria County State's Attorney's Office filed a charge of first-degree murder against Robert Ely for the murder of Dr. William Marshall. We obtained a warrant for Robert Ely's arrest, and he was taken into custody in the St. Louis area yesterday afternoon. Mr. Ely is part of a group of individuals who have been burglarizing homes throughout central Illinois and other states for some time now. His crew would target the elderly, usually those who lived alone, and would use a ruse to gain entry into people's homes. Mr. Ely was good at what he did. Today, that criminal enterprise has come to an end. As many of you know, on January 6, officers responded to the home of Dr. Marshall, where they found him deceased. He had died of multiple stab wounds. He also had defensive wounds on his hands and arm. Police were able to develop a description of both the suspect and the vehicle based on an eyewitness, as well as surveillance videos from the neighborhood. That information was then broadcasted to other law enforcement agencies throughout Illinois, which then led to several similar burglary hits in other jurisdictions. Based on that information, we were able to develop that Robert Ely was our suspect. We were able to locate a vehicle, the vehicle that was used in the burglary here, in the eventual murder. And in that vehicle, we located the murder weapon, which was a knife. We then later were able to recover paintings that had been stolen in this incident in a storage unit that also has ties to Robert Ely. I cannot emphasize enough the collaboration that went into this through law enforcement, not only on the local level here with the Peoria Police Department and my office, but on the statewide level, the U.S. Attorney's Office, the FBI, as well as county attorneys in Missouri. All played a part in bringing Robert Ely to face justice. In particular, I do want to mention a few names of the Peoria Police Department: Detective Vasquez, Detective Hulse, Detective Miller, and Sergeant Johnston spent countless hours, days, months on this case. They never gave up. We had repeated conversations in our office on this case and what it would take to successfully prosecute somebody for this. And this case would not be here today without their tireless efforts. So I cannot thank those four individuals in particular enough. I will take some questions at the end. Keep in mind, I am limited. I can't go into everything. I'm limited to any probable cause statements that were given to a judge or judges throughout this case. I will turn it over at this time now to Captain Dixon. I know Interim Chief Theobald is present as well, who I'm sure would be happy to take any questions if you need, but I will turn it over to Captain Dixon to talk a little bit more about the law enforcement collaboration that went into this. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Again, I'm Captain Dixon of the Peoria Police Department. I'm in charge of our Criminal Investigations Division. Once again, I just want to point out the amount of collaboration that was required in this homicide investigation. I still currently have detectives in St. Louis working with St. Louis Metropolitan Homicide, so this is still ongoing. We are still actively working this investigation, and we will continue to do this investigation until until all the evidence has been resolved. So we worked closely, almost immediately. This investigation started to spiral out of the area. We began to obtain evidence that this was not, the murder was an isolated incident, but the MO of this crime was not. And we were able to determine pretty quickly that this was involved a bigger region, including central Illinois, out of state, and we began to gather resources to tackle this investigation. I'd be remiss if I didn't point out the help that we had from the U.S. Attorney's Office, both here and in St. Louis, the FBI, St. Louis Metropolitan Homicide, and of course our Peoria Police detectives, and I'm sorry if I'm leaving anybody out, but incredible effort. You know, it's happened back in January. You know, this caused a lot of, due to the nature of the crime, and, you know, to say the community was concerned would be an understatement. I wish we could have given them more information up front. They were extremely patient. I'd not only like to thank the community, but Dr. Marshall's family for their confidence in us and their patience while we put together this exhaustive, collaborative investigation. So that's pretty much it that I have. If somebody has some questions, I'll tell you up front that evidentiary questions I will refer to State's Attorney Hoos. I could answer more procedural questions, things like that, but I'm not going to get specific on the case because we still have to try this.
Brad, one of the things that I'd like to know is you mentioned it became pretty clear that this was something that was bigger than just the local area. Jody's also said that. What are some of the things that made you immediately think, or that you learned that was out of the air? I mean, is this like a ring? Is this a group of folks? Is this an organized mob? I mean, what is this?
So I'd describe it as a traveling criminal enterprise with a very specific MO. It would shock the conscience, honestly, about some of the deception that these people do on our most vulnerable parts of society. So we started off like we do all investigations, canvassing, doing just the down and dirty police work that we always do, just solid detective work. We came up with some video evidence, which is pretty standard in our cases. However, there were some unique features that we saw that indicated, being January, some things stood out immediately to the detectives, and you know, they were able to piece together pretty quick that this was more than likely somebody from out of town, and shortly after that we were able to confirm that.
When you say that this was a traveling enterprise, and two, could you maybe share with me what stood out?
Well, I don't want to go into specifics on other people involved because I know there's some uncharged cases. I also know that this investigation's not over, and we're not done investigating other leads we have in relation to additional people that may or may not have been involved in this incident. So I'm not going to comment on that specifically, but I'll say that this is a very specific MO that we are aware of, and we know it has happened around the central Illinois area and outside of the state as well. It's just very specific MO that they use, and I'll leave it at that unless the state's attorney wants to elaborate.
Should people be worried still? The question has to ask is, they're saying that this is a very specific thing and you caught this person, but you won't say if there's other folks out there. Could there be other people who are working with him who are still preying on these vulnerable populations?
So I'll comment about this case specifically, and like I alluded to earlier, there was a lot of concern from the neighborhood, a lot of concern from the community about this incident, and rightly so. We were able to establish very on in our investigation that our investigation led us out of state, and we were confident that everybody in the neighborhood was not at risk from this happening. We were monitoring the situation, and we're confident that they were not in danger. However, I will say the neighborhood, specifically the neighborhood association in the community, put a lot of confidence in us. We told them they were not in danger, and they had the confidence to believe in us, and I appreciate that.
Jody, could you answer some questions here?
Yeah, and I'll follow up, Mr. Kravitz, with the
good,
last
thanks.
question that you just asked. You know, I don't think that the community should feel concerned anymore. I do want to emphasize, and I say this all the time, be smart about the people that you let into your home. As I indicated, Mr. Eli was very good at what he did, and he would convince the people that maybe he had been there before or that they somehow knew him. So I just remind people, don't let strangers into your homes, even if they're a smooth talker or seem nice or maybe look like your long-lost grandson. Don't do it. Don't allow them in. Talk to them through the door if you have to, but just don't allow them into your homes.
Could there be more folks charged in this case? Obviously, you will take things where the train goes, as the saying says. But should we expect more coming out of this?
We are looking at other charges, yes.
Other charges against him or other folks?
Both.
Okay. You mentioned the great deal of work that went into this and everything else. There might be some people who say, you spent a ton of time on this case, we have plenty of other cases here. How much effort is going into solving some of those other cases?
To those people, I would say that effort is on their cases as well.
Okay.
We have weekly conversations with the police department on other unsolved cases, not just homicide cases. There are lots of cases that aren't solved, and people shouldn't think that they've just gone away. The police department is actively working on those cases, and I think if anything, this is a message to those people that maybe are still hoping that there's some justice in their case, that it can happen. I'm guessing at this time yesterday, Robert Eli didn't think he'd be sitting in jail, and he is now. So it can happen.
As far as this traveling group, could you maybe
Okay, last
try-
one, Mr. Kravitz, and I want to give other people a question. No, go ahead. You can finish that one.
As far as this traveling group, could you maybe, what do you guys mean? Is that, did he go from town to town to town trying to rob folks and break into their home? I mean,
Yes, we believe he was involved in other burglaries in other cities.
Has any evidence been seized, or what led up as to how they chose Dr. Marshall?
Not from his MO is he targets the elderly, just targets, I don't know if he happened to see Dr. Marshall out in his yard before that. I have no idea. You probably have to ask Mr. Eli that. But Dr. Marshall does appear to fit the MO, the victim, I guess the makeup of victims in other burglaries.
Did we know if Robert Eli was hanging out up here in Peoria from St. Louis? That's the
Don't know that.
he was
But
living around
I
here.
would suspect that he probably had been casing the area, but we don't know that for sure.
We don't know anything about timeline of how long he was up here for.
No. Did you have one in
Yeah,
front?
so-
Yeah.
Sorry,
That's
one
okay.
moment, please.
Yeah, no problem.
I'm vaccinated, I promise. So you mentioned that this was part of a bigger thing and more burglaries. Is there a reason why you believe that Dr. Marshall's led to his death versus, have there been other murders or homicides as well, or maybe what led to his death versus, what's been going on overall?
So most of the other incidents were just burglaries. They didn't result in a death of an individual, fortunately. We suspect, based on the coroner's report, the autopsy report, as well as the scene and what had occurred in the other burglaries, that Dr. Marshall probably figured out what was going on, tried to stop it or get the individual out of his house, and unfortunately that then led to the confrontation, to the death of Dr. Marshall. Because he did have defensive wounds, obviously was struggling with Mr. Eli.
Can you expand a little more on what you know about how he would enter houses? I know you mentioned just talking, or is that how he would enter? Would he convince people they knew them, or how would that go?
Unfortunately, I can't go into those facts. Again, I'm limited to what has been said to the court throughout the case. And I'm not sure if more specifics were on that. Other than it was a ruse and it was a clever one. You know, I can't emphasize enough, he was good at what he did. And that's all I can say at this point.
And it was artwork that he was after?
Yes, there were paintings that were stolen from Dr. Marshall's residence that were located in the storage unit that I had mentioned.
Is that a motive then, are you saying? Because he said the reason was artwork.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't hear that part. Well, it was a burglary. I can't say that Robert Eli knew of the artwork in the home. You know, I don't know if that's why he went in, but obviously the purpose of going into that home was for a burglary to obtain something of value, and the paintings were valuable paintings.
So there was no patterns of what exactly they were looking for, just hoping to break in and find something?
Correct.
What else was discovered in that storage unit, can you say?
I'm not able to say that right now.
When do you think Mr. Eli shall be back here? Because he has been in charge. Bond has been set. Obviously, the case has to still go in front of a grand jury, but what is the estimated time frame?
Hopefully next week. So because he's out of state, that's one of the reasons that the case progressed as it did. Law enforcement doesn't always just have jurisdictional authority to go across state lines and arrest somebody. So we had to get a warrant, file the charge, get a warrant, and that gives us the ability to then take him into custody. We'll work with the local I think Missouri's county attorney, not state's attorney, but we'll work with them to get him extradited. Mr. Eli has the opportunity or the right to waive extradition or to contest it. That's entirely up to him. If he waives it, it will be a shorter process. If he contests it, it'll be a little bit longer. But I would hope sometime within the next week to 10 days that he would be back in our county jail. Anyone else? Okay, thank you all. Oh,
I
yep,
had
go
a
ahead.
question. So
Sure.
earlier today, I spoke with someone that was in the neighborhood, and they had actually mentioned that besides what happened to Dr. Marshall, that another burglary had happened within a past year or so. Do you know if there's been other people in that neighborhood specifically impacted by this group?
Well, I don't know that, but I will say part of the reason that Captain Dixon and I had talked earlier about having a press conference is that we're hoping that maybe other people come forward. You know, unfortunately, people that live alone or people that are elderly are hesitant to report these types of crimes. You know, maybe they're embarrassed or ashamed or feel guilty for being taken advantage of, and they don't often report crimes like this. So we are hoping that, well, not hoping, because I wouldn't want that to have occurred to those people, but for those individuals that maybe had not reported it, that this would prompt them to report it to the police department, and we may be able to link him to some other cases, but I don't know at this point. Okay, thank you all for being here, and everybody enjoy your afternoon.
Thanks.